Welcome to Module 2 of Inspiring Meaningful Worship. This module is really all looking at the concept of space, the space in which worship takes place. Now, as we would have looked at in terms of the intensive in Module 1, we looked at the whole concepts of what worship is. We looked at what are the components of worship, what are the elements that comprise worship. And what is the concept of liturgy, the concept of what are we doing together as the people of Christ. And it's those things that we talk about in doing worship. But in this module, what I want to look at is saying, what is the space then? What is the environment in which worship takes place? And that has changed dramatically over the centuries of Christianity, from the early church through to the Middle Ages church, and then through to the Reformation, when there was the huge upheaval within particularly Western Christianity. And that upheaval changed dramatically the way in which the space in which worship takes place changed. Obviously, as that change happened, it then developed through into the new centuries, into the 20th century particularly, where a whole new brand of Christianity began to develop, a new Reformation, if you will, the Pentecostal Reformation, where the Pentecostalism came into the church and again changed the way in which the space in which we would do worship was involved. Obviously now in the later part of the 20th century, the early part of the 21st century, there's been a change again. Much more subtle change, and certainly not a widespread one, but a change that brings about, again, a change of space and the way in which we worship in that space. In this module, what we're going to be doing is looking at the concept of the worship or the sacred space in which worship takes place. To have a look at your own church, to look at the place where you get together to worship with the community of Christ, and to say, how does our space relate to the way in which we want to do worship? In fact, I would think that for most worship leaders, one of the most challenging things that they may do is to try and connect the type of worship that they're trying to do with the space in which they have to do it. You may want a contemporary, upbeat, celebratory type service, but your church was built in the 18th century. It may have been built a long time before that, when in fact a different kind of worship was taking place. One in which heavy, dark pews and dark ornamentation were actually the focus of what they were doing. Obviously, you're going to have a problem then between the type of worship that you're wanting to do and the environment or the space in which that worship takes place. Some things you can't change. But one of the great things that we need to do is to begin to say to ourselves, what is it about space that's important? How do we need to understand the space in which that particular concept of worship takes place? And then to begin to think creatively about how we can use our space to both inform our worship style and how we can then maybe change the space to be greater in its ability to be able to connect people to what we're trying to achieve in worship. In this module, we want to look at each of those questions and to see what answers we can come up with.